evening. 6 years ago today at Miami Beach, Richard Milhous Nixon accomplished perhaps the most remarkable political comeback in American history. After campaigns in 1960 and 62 had branded him a loser, Nixon won the Republican presidential nomination and was on his way to the White House. And on this night, August 8th in 1968, he had this to say.
America's in trouble today not because her people have failed, but because her leaders have failed. And what America needs are leaders to match the greatness of her people.
The former Vice President of the United States, Richard Nixon, won the election of 1968 in the Republican Party against the Democratic nominee, Hubert Humphrey. He served 2 terms in office, but 2 years into his second term, he resigns from office. During his time in office, he had many great accomplishments that strongly impacted America. These accomplishments include creating the EPA to ensure that the environment was protected and healthy, ending the draft to make serving in the military optional, smashing the deficit that was accumulated by the Vietnam War, and lowering the voting age to the age of 18.
Without inflation at home. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour.
During this time in America, with the current assassination of 2 political leaders, John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., America was in need of a strong leader to help them get through these difficult times. Also, with the current problem of the Vietnam War, which caused many struggles in America's economy.
You, Richard Milhous Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Richard Milhous Nixon, do solemnly swear.
That you will faithfully execute the office.
That I will faithfully execute the office.
Of President of the United States.
Of President of the United States. Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
On the night of June 17, 1972, 5 men were caught and arrested for burglary at the Democratic National Committee in the Watergate office complex for stealing information for the opposing political party and attempted wiretapping.
People became suspicious of President Nixon after the Washington Post published a story by Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward stating that the FBI thought that supporters of President Nixon were involved in the break-in. This caused people to associate Nixon with the Watergate scandal.
With the new controversy over Nixon's possible involvement, Congress becomes very concerned. Congress assigns a committee to investigate Nixon's involvement in the Watergate trial. The political investigation uncovers secret tapings of the conversation within the White House. These tapes include conversations of Nixon and Haldeman discussing the break-in. This created tension between the Congress and the president. Congress strongly considered impeaching Nixon.
Nixon's tapes are recovered and released by Congress's investigation. Not all of the recorded tapes are released because he deleted many of them. The tapes are called smoking gun tapes, which is used as a metaphor to say that he was caught red-handed.
On the investigation, the Democratic break-in thing, we're back in the problem area because the FBI is not under control because Gray doesn't exactly know how to control it. And their investigation is now leading into some productive areas.
18 months into his second term, President Nixon resigns from office. After facing possible impeachment, Vice President Ford steps up to take office as President of the United States. Richard Nixon goes down in history as the first and only president to have resigned from the presidential office.
Many people lost respect for Nixon as a political leader. His actions caused people to be less trusting of those in leadership positions. These political cartoons depict most of the public's attitude towards the scandal. Although most were disheartened to hear that he was part of the scandal, some did not change their opinion about him. Many of Nixon's supporters and colleagues changed their opinion of him after the Watergate scandal arose. Many agreed it was a terrible tragedy, like Leon Jaworski said. From Watergate, we learned what generations before us have known. Our Constitution works, and during the Watergate years, it was interpreted again, so as to reaffirm that no one, absolutely no one, is above the law. Now that Ford is president, he has the power to pardon. Ford pardons Nixon, getting him out of trouble with the law.
My name is I'm an associate professor of history at Palm Beach Atlantic University. Been there since 2003, and I teach American and European history courses.
So, considering Nixon before the scandal, what did you think of him as a president? Now I know you weren't technically able to think and process things, but as a historian looking back, how did you view him?
Well, I mean, I was a little kid. I was 3 years old when he resigned the office in August of 1974. But I think overall, as a historian, I think, and this has happened with a lot of former presidents who have had rough things happen during their presidency, like Herbert Hoover, for example, the Great Depression, or Jimmy Carter with the down economy when he was president in the 70s. Like those presidents, I think history is looking a little more kindly on Nixon overall, although the Watergate scandal was very serious and a terrible trespassing of justice, no doubt. But I think in terms of his foreign policy, opening doors to China was something, and bringing an end to the Vietnam War, although that has really given the Nixon presidency maybe a little bit more positive, a little more of a positive view ever since his presidency. But
really affected a lot of Americans.
Oh, absolutely, it really did. I think, I think the legacy of Watergate is still with us today. And I think in terms of the media, too, Watergate still has a legacy, because I think ever since Woodward and Bernstein did their work with the Washington Post and bringing out the details of the scandal, I think the media really ever since has wanted to have that big gotcha moment, if you will, on a president, and has been very adversarial in a lot of cases to presidents, like between the media and Donald Trump. I think a lot of it can be traced back to the Watergate era, I think.
So regarding kind of around that time, JFK was assassinated, and also Martin Luther King Jr. Mm-hmm. Do you think people kind of trusted that Nixon was going to be the next big guy?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, Nixon was kind of appreciated because he spoke to a lot of Americans in that, he talked, much like Donald Trump in his recent inaugural address, said, well, there's a forgotten man and a forgotten woman, and I'm looking out for you. Well, Nixon also spoke about the silent majority. So I think Nixon was seen coming in as someone who would be a unifier to a great extent.
I think that Nixon should have resigned from the presidency?
He should have. I mean, because it allowed for the country to heal, I think, a lot more quickly. As Gerald Ford said, our long national nightmare is over. And I think, it was clear after the Nixon tapes had come out and he had been definitely covering up and knew what had happened with Watergate and was part of the cover-up, or at least knew about it. And also the fact that many of or at least several minutes of the Nixon tapes had been erased. The Congress or the House of Representatives was ready to pass articles of impeachment, and it wouldn't have looked good for him. If there had been a trial, he probably would have been removed from office. So I think the resignation at least helped the healing process to get on a little bit more quickly. And Gerald Ford was seen as a unifying figure.
The American citizens were looking for a political leader to whom they could trust and restore the broken economy. At this particular time in history, the people of America were astounded that President Nixon was involved in the Watergate scandal. As a result of Nixon's involvement in the scandal, he resigned and was further pardoned by President Ford. President Ford's pardoning of Nixon relieved him from being incarcerated. This caused many of the American people to be less trusting of political leaders in the future.